Okay, with the Eibishter's help, today's daf is Masechta Bava Basra daf Pei Dalid, and we're starting from the Mishnah on daf Pei Gimel Omid Bey. So I'm going to make it very big, and Zug the Heilige Mishnah. Zug the Heilige Mishnah. Hamoiche es Roisha Behema Gasa. Anyone sells the head of a large animal, let's say an ox. Loy mocha es haraglayim. The feet are not included in the sale. If you're selling the head, that doesn't include the four legs. Mochas or raglaim. If you stipulated in the sale that I'm only selling the legs, loy mochas or roish, then you didn't sell the
Head.
head because they're not included in the sale. Mocher esa kona. If you sell the kona is the lungs, right? The kona is, maybe I have a picture over here. The kona is this. The kona is the lungs, or the kana is actually the trachea, with including the lungs. So the Mishnah says, loy machas a kaved. The liver is not included in the sale. Machar as a kaved, but if you sold the liver, loy machas a kana, then you didn't sell the lungs. Aval, but because these are large parts of a large animal. Aval badaka, but a small animal like a sheep or a goat. So then, mochas roish, if you sold the head, he said, I'm only selling you the head, mochas the feet go along with it. But if you only sold the feet, mochas roish, then you didn't sell the head. Mochas a if you sell the lungs, the trachea, mochas a then the liver goes along with it. But mochas a but if you're selling the liver, so then that is important in the small animal, loy mochas akona, then the lungs don't go with it. Okay, so now the Mishnah describes you arba midas b'moichrin. There are four characteristics of a sale. In other words, there are four possibilities of who can back out of a sale. Four possibilities of a sale. Okay, let's say they agreed that the seller is going to sell mochel loichitin yafos. He was going to sell nice, high quality wheat, benim tzuras, and then it turns out when the purchaser got it, it was low quality wheat. Then then the purchaser can retract from the transaction. Now there should be no chiddush to you, but you'll see the Mishnah. There is the Gemara is going to discuss what the novelty of that. Again, they agreed he was going to sell low quality wheat, and by accident he gave over to the purchaser yafos, good quality wheat. So then the seller could retract on the transaction. So here's the purchaser, now it's the seller. Let's say he made up to sell bad wheat and he sold inferior quality wheat. Or he made up to sell good quality wheat, and it turned out to be good quality wheat. Nobody can retract. Nobody can retract on that sale. We're on pay Gimel on base by the Mishnah. Bottom up. Let's say the agreement was he's going to sell red wheat, and it turns out it was white wheat. Or he turned out that he was going to sell white wheat, and he turned out that it was red wheat. Or let's say the sale was for Eitz and Shazayas, olive wood, and it turns out he accidentally gave sycamore or sycamore. The agreement was that there was going to be sycamore. The guy's purchasing sycamore wood, and he got olive wood instead. The purchase was for wine. And then he got vinegar instead. The agreement was that he was going to sell vinegar, and it turned out to be wine. So it's there, the Mishnah says, so it's a totally different product than what you wanted. So
different prices.
So both the seller and the purchaser can retract on the sale. The purchaser said, "I didn't get what I bought. I bargained for," and the seller can say, "Oh, I accidentally gave you the wrong item," so they both can back out of the sale. So the Gemara, Omer Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda said a comment like this. He said like this. Mochar loy shavei chamesh b'sheish. Let's say he sold something that was worth 5, and he got 6 for it. Let's say it was supposed to be only be sold for $500, and you sold it and you got $600. So the purchaser got ripped off. But that's not the end of the story. So really, the purchaser had time to go ask, an expert to see if he's getting ripped off. And during that time that he was going to ask somebody if he got ripped off, because we give him the opportunity to back out of the sale because he overpaid. But what happened was no tough on him. V'hukar v'amar al shmoina. It got worth more, and now the item, which was originally worth 5, is now worth 8. So in fact, he underpaid the item, and now the seller wants to back out. He says, "I sold something that's 8 for 5." Mi nisana. So who Rav Chisda said, who got really ripped off originally? Lokeach, the purchaser. So in this case, Lokeach yochel laksaboy, only the purchaser can retract, v'loy moicher, and not the seller. Even though it turns out at the end of the story, the seller is losing out because he sold something that's 5 that actually turned out to be worth 8. Mishum Amalei, because we go to the Amad Al Pedal Amad Aleph, Mishum the Amalei, because the seller, the purchaser will say to the seller, Ilu loy anisan. Let's say you didn't fool me and you sold me what it was worth. So then the sale was valid. Loy hava matzos hadrachbach. You couldn't retract on the sale, right? If it was a fair sale. So now that the sale didn't really go through until I had to, ask an expert if I'm getting ripped off. So Hashta, now that I'm checking to see if you ripped me off, the Einisan, that it turns out that in fact, originally you did rip me off, but now at the end of the story, I'm ripping you off. Matzos Hadrachbach, now I'm going to allow you to retract on the sale. You lost out. You lost out in the beginning by you trying to rip me off, and therefore you cannot retract on the sale, Mr. Seller. V'tana toina, and that is exactly what we learned in the Mishnah. You see, our Mishnah says, Yafis, they agreed to sell good quality wheat, Vinim Tzura'is, and it turns out to be inferior quality wheat. So then, Loikeach Yochel Lachzaboy, V'loy Moichar, only the purchaser can retract and not the seller. Now think about that. Of course, the purchaser can retract because he paid for or thought he's getting good quality wheat, and he got inferior quality wheat. So what's the novelty of that? The answer is that our Mishnah is discussing that somehow the inferior quality wheat was now, there was a shortage, and that increased in its price. And it's worth more than what he actually paid for. He paid for Yafos, he got Roys, but during the interim, the Roys are now much more than what he paid for when he originally paid for the Yafos. So I would think that the Moicher could retract because he can say, "Hey, I sold you something that turned out you underpaid me. I sold you something that's worth more than what you paid me." Since the answer is only the Mishnah is saying, only the purchaser can retract, not the seller. Because who got, basically messed over first? The purchaser. So the purchaser is in the driver's seat, and the seller can never retract. So it seems that Rav Chisda's point is actually brought out in the Mishnah. And then that's going to lead us to the next question, but let's just leave that for a moment. Rav Chisda said, the opposite case. The seller got ripped off. How does the seller get ripped off? He sold something worth 6 for 5. So now the seller got ripped off. And then it went down in price. And now it's only worth 3. So the purchaser paid 5 for something that's now only worth 3. So now who can back out of the sale? Who got originally messed over? Moicher. In the beginning, the seller got messed over. And the seller still didn't consummate the sale because he could always say, wait a second, I sold you something for worth much more than what you paid for. So he was the original person that got ripped off. So the answer is, but now, subsequently, over time, the seller now got ripped off because the seller, it went down in value. The item went down in value. Now it's only worth 3, and he actually paid 5. The answer is only the seller can back out of such a sale, not the purchaser. The Amalei, because the seller can say, if there was no ripoff, if you actually paid what it was worth, right? This sold you something that what it was worth, then there would be no backsies over here. So now you, Mr. Purchaser, Hashtas, now that you tried to rip me off originally by underpaying for something that's worth more, and now you want to back out because it went down in value. Matza hadrichbach, I'm going to allow you to retract and back out of the sale. Wait a second, you're going to be a choite niska. You tried to rip me off originally, and now you should be punished for that. That you have no right to back away. But Tanatonian, that's exactly what our Mishnah is saying. Rois v'nim to Yafois, he only agreed to sell inferior quality, and by accident, the seller gave over high quality wheat. Only the seller can back out of it, and not the purchaser. The seller, because he got ripped off, he only agreed to give Rois, and he accidentally gave Yafois, but not the purchaser, even though it subsequently went down in value. So the Yafois went so down in value that the Lekeach overpaid for these Rois, for the inferior quality wheat, which even though he got Yafois, but he overpaid because the price went down. So then, too bad. Only the seller can retract and not the purchaser. So now the question is, since these novel ideas of Rav Chisda were actually brought out in the Mishnah, where the Mishnah doesn't allow both of them to retract, but in certain instances, only the seller can retract, not the purchaser, or the opposite. Sometimes the purchaser can retract, not the seller. So my Kamash Malam, what is Rav Chisda trying to teach you? Mas Nisani, it is a Mishnah. So it is a Mishnah. The answer is, so Rav Chisda's case is very different than our Mishnah. In our Mishnah's case, it was an item of inferior quality versus high quality. So then I would think that only in that case, we only allow the initial person that was ripped off decide to back out, because he could always say, the initial person that got ripped off could say, I wasn't ripped off. There is no rip off over here, because I was going to accept it anyway. For example, when it turns out, let's say in the beginning, Yafois v'nimtzu ra'is, he said he was going to buy good quality wheat, and the purchaser got bad quality wheat. The purchaser says, I need wheat anyway, and even if you would have given me good quality wheat, I would have said they're bad anyway. So the purchaser, on all circumstances, was agreeing to the sale. So since the purchaser, who was originally the one that could have gotten ripped off, is moichel on his rip-off, so then the seller cannot say, oh, I want to use my trump card and back out of the sale. If the person himself who was originally ripped off is not wanting to back out, so then we won't allow the other party to back out. And same thing, the opposite case as well. When the seller sold in the second case, when the seller agreed to sell bad wheat and he accidentally gave the good wheat, he was going to sell anyway. He needed to unload some wheat. He originally wanted to only give the inferior quality wheat, but he ended up giving the good quality wheat. So the seller, in the second case of the Mishnah, was agreeable to the sale. So once the seller was agreeable to the sale, there is no I know over there. That's why I would say only one can back out, not the other. But in Rav Chisda's case, I would think, because since it's a price difference, right? It's a price difference. There's no way that the person who got ripped off on price would have ever forgiven that situation. So I would think that in that situation, in Rav Chisda's case, both can come back away from the sale. So Kamash Malam, that's what Rav Chisda says. No, only one can back away from sale, not the other. So let's read it inside. In the case of Rav Chisda, both of them could back out of the sale, because there it's a question of price, whether a person overpaid or underpaid a price. So then the price is fluctuated, so then we allow the seller and the purchaser to back away. It's only mashnisin in the case of the Mishnah. In that case, only the purchaser can back away. We skip this because the purchaser, even though he paid good for good wheat and got bad wheat, he would have said anyway, even if he got the good wheat, he would have said it's bad wheat. So the purchaser was already forgiving on his being ripped off. So if the purchaser was being forgiving, so then we could expect the seller to also be forgiving if subsequently he was ripped off. So therefore, in the Mishnah's case, I would think only one, but not the other. But not in Rav Chisda's case. So Kamash Malam Rav Chisda says, no, that's not the reason. In all situations, and this is the way to remember it, in all situations, it's the one that got ripped off initially, he can decide he can back out of the deal. If it turns out in the long run that somebody else got ripped off, then he can't back out of the sale. Okay, next Gemara. Here's the most interesting Gemara of the day. I mean, from a science point of view. The Mishnah said that there are two types of wheat, and you agreed to sell shechamtis, v'nimtzis labana. You were going to sell red wheat, and it turned out to be white wheat. Now, here is a fascinating piece of Gemara, because why would you call the color red chama? Sun. Chama is, is sun. So why would you call it red? So first, the Gemara, Amar Al Papa said, Mitikatani Levana, since he said that if there's white wheat, Shmami na, Hai Shimsha, Simaktehi, that when you're calling red wheat, you're calling it the sun, it's the color of the sun, that means the sun is the color of red. Now, if you look up at the sun throughout the day, it's not red. What the Gemara is saying is that the true color of the sun is red, right? The true color of the sun, it's red. And when do you see the color of the sun red? Heida, the kosamke sapra upanya, early morning, and by towards sunset, the sun actually turns from white to red. So we see that the sun's true color is red. Now that happens from a scientific point of view, is because throughout the day the sun is closer to us, and therefore everything, the sun is closer to us, so we can't. The Gemara is going to say it that our eyes cannot see that color. But when it's farther away from us, from the two ends, from sunrise and at sunset, the scattering of the colors of the sun, red doesn't scatter so much. So therefore, the sun appears to be red at that time. Why don't you see it red throughout the day? Our eyes, our vision is not so clear to see the true color of the sun, which is red. So the Gemara concludes that the color of the sun is actually red. So the Gemara asks, Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. Umarehu omek mina ar. The Torah says a white nega, is deeper than the skin itself, right? And the Gemara darshans, Kemare Chama Amuka Minatzel, like the sun is deeper than the shade. That's the comparison. When you look at a nega that's white versus your skin, it's like the sun versus the shade. So wait a second, the Brisa compares the sun to the color of white versus your skin. V'hasam lavenu, and therefore the Brisa seems to say that the sun is actually white. And you just got through saying that the true color of the sun is actually red. What is it? Answers the Gemara, really the true color of the sun is red, but what that Brisa means, that it looks like the sun versus the shade, a nega is like that, it doesn't mean that a nega is actually the color of the sun. It's kamarakama loy kamarakama. It's like the sun, the appearance of the sun, but not exactly like the appearance of the sun. Kamarakama, it looks like the sun, damuka minatzel, because it's deeper than the shade. Loy kamarakama, but it's not like the sun, because the ilu hasam lavan, the sun actually, but the nega actually is white. V'hacha, but the true color of the sun is adam, is red. Okay, so now the Gemara is concluding that the real color of the sun, if you got real close to the sun, it's actually, the true color of the sun is red. Now, the Gemara says, how could you have ever said that the color of the sun is white, but we do see that the sun turns red? So how you originally thought that the color of the sun is only white, but it turns red early morning and late by sunset. So how do you reconcile that? Answers the Gemara, the true color of the sun is white. I would think b'tzafar in the morning, the chalfa abei barde the Gan Eden, it passes by the roses of Gan Eden, so therefore it looks red. B'panya, during the evening, the chalfa pischa the Gehenna. If you look up at the sky, I would think the sun is passing over the opening of Gehenna, and therefore the sun is actually transparent, and that's why the sun looks red in the evening time. The Ikeda Amri Ipcha, some say just the opposite. When it's in the west, as the sun is setting, it's actually opposite. It's actually opposite Gan Eden, which is the east. So actually, the sun is reflecting Gan Eden, which is in the east, which is on the east side. And in the morning, when the sun is on the east, it's reflecting, not that it's transparent, it's actually like a mirror reflecting Gehenna, which is on the west. But that's I would have thought. But really, the true color of the sun is white. So the answer is no. The true color of the sun is red, and that's why you call red wheat instead of adom. You call it chamtis, red. Interesting. Yayin benim tzachaymis. If you find wine and it's wine, it turns out to be vinegar. Shneim yichayim lachzer behem. They both can retract because wine is not vinegar. So you go. Are you going to say lema maslisa Rebbe he like Rabbanam? Are you going to say I'm going to go to Rebbe, not Rabbanam? In the Tanya we learned in the Brisa. We go to Amud Beis. Yayin v'chaymitz min echad. Yayin and chaymitz are considered the same thing. You didn't rip each other off. Rebbe says Shnei Minim. It's considered two different things, and therefore, if you ordered wine and you got vinegar, you can retract. So our Mishnah goes according to Rebbe and not like the Rabbanan. Answers the Gemara Afilu Teva Rabbanan. You could also say that our Mishnah goes according to Rabbanan. Ad kan like complete Rabbanan later Rebbe. Rabbanan consider wine and vinegar as one min elul inya meiser truma, only regarding trumas and meisers. That means that Rabbi Loi said that means how do you know if you took something inferior quality and gave it truma on behalf of something that's superior quality? The truma is good. If you took vinegar and you gave it truma on behalf of wine, how do you know it's a good truma? So the Torah says, don't do an avera when you don't take truma from the best one. If you take from the worst one, the inferior, on behalf of the best of the superior, you get an avera, but it's still truma. It made a kaddish if it's not holy, and you see his chet lama. Why did you get an avera if it's not truma? So mekan, from here we see the Torah in a royal yafa. If you take truma from, let's say, vinegar on behalf of wine, the truma would work. So regarding truma, we consider it to be as one item. Wine is just vinegar is just wine spoiled. But if you make a transaction with somebody and you specifically ask for vinegar or you specifically ask for wine, you were pedantic. You wanted that, and therefore the sale will be invalid because they're considered like your sale was not your agreement was not met. The kuli alma ika in the whole world, everybody they all agree that it's considered as two. Even Rabbanan would consider it as two distinct species. Some people like wine, but they don't want vinegar. Some want vinegar, they don't want wine. So therefore, the sale is invalid. If you ordered wine, you got vinegar, even though they're technically the same thing. That's regarding truma, but as a sales transaction, the sale is void. Next Mishnah, someone who sells fruits to his friends, right? Mashach, and let's say you have a selling fruits to your friend, and let's say there's fruits in a bag, and it's so heavy. Mashach, you just pulled the fruits to you, but you didn't count the fruits, so you didn't put it into your basket. Kana, you acquired the fruits because you did mashicha by pulling it a little bit, even though you didn't actually count how many fruits are in the bag. You acquired those fruits. Madad, but let's say you started counting the fruits. Let's say you took the seller's bag and you said, "Oh, Mr. Seller, this is your bag. I'm going to use it just to count the fruits that you're selling me." But like mashach, but you didn't pull it to you, so like kana, you didn't acquire it. But im hoya pikach, let's say the purchaser wants to acquire the fruits right away, and he doesn't have time to count all the fruits that he's buying. Then he rents out the spot that's underneath the fruits and says, "Listen, Mr. Seller, let me rent this spot. So I own the land underneath where the fruit is. So that becomes my land, and I acquire those fruits because it's there in my courtyard." Someone who buys flax from his friend, until you actually lift them up, right? Because flax actually is lighter. So until you actually pick them up, there's no such thing. I guess the Mishnah is saying that there's no mashicha regarding flax. You have to actually move it, take it from place to place. But if the flax was connected to the ground, the talash kalsher, and you cut it a little bit and you just held it a little bit in the air, kana, you acquired the flax. We'll stop in a half a minute. Amar Avasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Madad, let's say you counted the fruits. Let's say you v'hiniach al gabe simta. Okay? and you put it onto a simta. Simta is the side road on a Rosh Hashanah. You counted some of the fruits that you're buying, and instead of putting it into your bag, you put it on the ground of the simta. Simta is not a Rosh Hashanah. It's like a little side road where everybody has a right to put their bag onto their side road. It's a rest stop, a safety zone. So kana, then you acquired it because the seller basically says, I technically own part of this simta. I'm pulling away my ownership of this simta because it really belongs to everybody who's in the public. But he says, I'm not going to own it, and I'm going to let you use the simta to acquire the fruits that I'm selling. Kana. Okay, Amalei Rab Zera. We'll stop in a minute. Amalei Rab Zera Rabasi. So Rab Zera said to Rabasi, Shema loy Shama Rebbe. You didn't hear correctly from Rabbi Yochanan that if you put it on the floor of the simta, you're kainid. Ella b'moidid. Rabbi Yochanan was talking about b'moidid l'soich kupase. You actually took the fruits. The purchaser put the fruits into his own little basket, and that's how he's kainid. Amalei, so Rabasi said, you think I didn't hear Rabbi Yochanan correctly? It seems to me that you never learned, you don't know how to learn. If the guy just counted the fruits and put it into his own basket, do I need Rabbi Yochanan to tell me that you're kainid? Certainly you're kainid. Certainly you acquired it. It's your basket. You put it into your basket. And must be that you actually took the fruits and put it on the floor of the simta, and there Rabbi Yochanan says you are kainid. So we're going to discuss more about this tomorrow, B'ez Hashem. Okay. Sorry for the late start. We'll do better tomorrow.